And start with it. So, just rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. And your arm. The side. And finally, okay, feet out. Dropping back in your chair. Feeling first of all your weight sinking into the chair. And that feeling of just releasing through the whole of your body as much as you can. Sort of draining away, dissolving away of tightness and stiffness. Just bringing your attention to your breathing. Place 1 or 2 hands on your belly and just see if you can feel the movement, the gentle rise and fall there as you breathe in and out. Either leave your hands there or take them to a more comfortable position. They're not that comfortable there. But keep your attention on your breathing and just notice this sort of slowing down and a slight pause between in-breath and out-breath and out-breath and in-breath. Pause is probably the wrong term. I've been referring to these moments of settling in as punctuation points, because when we punctuate a sentence or a paragraph, we make a division, but there might be a slight gap, but we don't lose the overall sense of the whole sentence or paragraph. And this is something we want to try and take into the movements that we're doing. We're coming to the upright position, taking a moment to settle in, and that's really that punctuation point, that moment of change is really, this is why I've stopped calling it a pause. It's not that nothing is happening. What's actually going on is a different type of activity. Rather than thinking I've got to move my hand here or do this exercise, it's just coming right back to this feeling of settling or quietening and everything associated with that, the focusing of your attention, the awareness, and maybe even changing to your posture, your weight sinking down. So that the entire exercise, and when we start to flow a little bit more from one exercise to another in these sessions, really the entire session is punctuated by these moments when we come back to this quality that I sometimes refer to as central equilibrium. And it's important to try and do that. It's the foundation, it's the core feeling in the sense that we want to have in all the exercises. It's also a feeling that gets very easily lost when we're caught up in the performance of of a movement. That is inevitable. We could see that as yin yang, the yang being the kind of active stage, and when we're active we lose touch with that foundation, and then yin in those little punctuation points is when we just return to that, remind ourselves of that. I remember from when I was a boy watching the documentary with David Attenborough, and it was a close-up of him clearly in a cave or something like that, but mostly him. And then the camera panned back and he was in this huge cave full of bats. And the impressive part about that image is that he was still at the center of the scene, but much smaller. But somehow his presence there gave you an idea of the perspective of the enormity of the cave that he was in. And we want to try and do the same thing with our awareness. We want to pull back, we want to enlarge the range of our awareness to include what we're doing with our hands and whatever else, whatever other part of the body we're moving. And yet at the same time, not lose that kind of focal point. And that's quite a difficult thing to do. So we have these moments where we don't have to think what comes next. We can go right back to the foundations and rebuild on that. So this applies to all of the exercises, starting as always with the turning of your head. We see it here. It's quite a slow start. It's very smooth in the middle, and then just coasting to that punctuation point, and then coming back. You won't notice it all the time, and you may notice it particularly in some movements and not in others. That's quite normal. But it's this phrase from the Tai Chi classics of sort of seeking the stillness within the movement. Hands on your shoulders. This is a very distinctive quality in Tai Chi. When we see Tai Chi as an exercise form, quite often in other exercise classes, there'll be some time, maybe at the end or something like that, for relaxation, sort of outside of the movement. But in Tai Chi, ideally, we look for the combination of both all the time. Going forwards. So with this one, for instance, it may be a good point to focus here, just as your elbows drop, to feel the weight of your arms. How we make that focus is going to change for us, and it's going to be different from person to person. Hands out to your sides, winding your arms. And then circling around. Back the other way. Now, when we tilt forwards and our weight goes more into our feet, then we can just settle. This pausing, punctuation becomes quite significant at this point. And what we can do is we can come back and we can just take a moment to feel, say, our hips settle in, our shoulders drop in, and then we go forwards. And again, we feel our weight going down into our feet sinking into the floor. there's various ways you can approach this. You could, for instance, go forwards and just take a breath in, and on the breath out, get that sense of sinking down. Same thing going back. If that suits you to do that, that can be a useful focus. It's important because, in particular with your feet, and when we come to the standing, I'll talk about this again. It helps with that physical connection to the ground, that rooting down. But another thing to notice is that after a while, the length of time that punctuation takes shrinks. It really only takes a moment, but it's an important moment. So just halting and thinking about it sometimes is an important thing to do, to remind ourselves that it's actually there. Turning a little bit. Otherwise, you can sometimes feel that, as we go through different exercises, and some of them quite complex and different ideas, it can feel like you're starting to run downhill. You can't quite put the brakes on. So we tend to lose that stillness within the movement. And there'll be a tendency to do that when we're doing movements that we find more challenging, more difficult. Turning the other direction away, now going more into that foot. Again, you could just pause there if you wanted to. Remind yourself of that. And then going around, you might choose to, for instance, feel that each transfer of the weight from hip to foot to foot to hip is an opportunity for that pausing. What you might want to do is to come to here, settle, and then carry on. Go back the other way. Coming back to the central position. Raise up one foot. Step out, put your heel down and then your toes. But then, before you bring your foot back, that gentle pressure downwards, like your foot's on soft sand and you're pushing your foot into sand and then coming back. And you'll find after a while that you'll need to just soften a little bit in the sole of your foot. Try and just release any tightness in your ankles or your toes in order to do that. So it has a knock-on effect in your everyday walking after a while. So that point of punctuation actually is very important. It's not just about not doing anything. In fact, it's not about not doing anything, but it's turning the focus of your attention to those elements that can be easily overlooked, but are crucial to the art. On the other side. Okay. So, bird folds its wings. Turn your hands palm forwards. Ease your weight forwards. Look for that little bit of settling. The stillness within the movement. Now change into fisherman castanet, settling into your hips and just feeling your arms swinging back slightly. Again, I'll show you from the side. Going forward, settling in, and nice and soft in your shoulders, just allowing that movement through. This is the point at which you might notice things that I've mentioned before, that slight sense of response, extension and contraction in, say, the muscles around the area of the chest, other little movements, small movements that contribute to the overall movement. And then rolling the ball. Meaning to pigeon spreads its wings. I mean, we might want to include our breathing with that. As I again said before, this is an exercise that can lend itself quite well for that, particularly here. Here you can imagine just taking the breath in. It may not last for the entire length of the movement, but again, the out breath would start really as we start to go forwards, ideally, but don't try and force that. If it works, fine. If it doesn't, then just bring your attention to something else. Change into pushing wave. One more time. And then punch with both fists. And then turning your hands out. And now polishing the table. Once more. Turn your hands palm up. Here, your arms, as though they're resting on the ball, hips drop, shoulders drop, and then the hands come down. Here, gentle press down, feel the movement upwards through your body, finally moving your arms. So in that moment of punctuation, we can observe very subtle changes and movements taking place through our body. Movements that we're going to pick up on to actually perform the exercise. One more time. Remote this. Heart in the clouds. Now, going back to the first of these, little sequence of three, the changeover coming at the lower point of punctuation. We finish here, we bring our hands out, unhurried. But we may find that there's an urgency to rush at that point. I suppose you could call it the point of change. and then change into dragon plucks the stars from the sky. So we get that unhurried quality, beginning to make itself felt all the way through the exercises, not just in those moments of punctuation. They're the reminder for us that that's what we're looking for. And the opportunity to actually find it, that's assuming that we've probably lost it at some point. One more time. Both hands together. This exercise actually draws our attention directly to the physical center of the body in that punctuation moment. The one thing we can do is to begin to associate that quality or those qualities that we find as we settle with this with an awareness of this particular part of the body, that area between hips and waist. Extend one foot, scoop in the sea, looking at the sky. Change into grasping the tiger's ears, a forward, upward movement through your spine and your head. Coming back, settle in. Wait until you feel the push up. Change sides. Scoop in the sea, looking at the sky. Again, notice a tendency to speed up, which most of us have. So we're always just wanting to quieter, to slow things down a little bit. Now, grasping the tiger's ears. Okay. Coming back to the central position. Your hands just here, below your shoulders, over your legs. Turn your right hand palm up. Raise your right hand as you settle. Rotate both arms, so right hand is palm down, left hand is palm up. Then you like your hands on either end of the seesaw. And there's that again, punctuation point. You know, we could argue that that was when the movement sort of pivoted from one side to another, from yang on one side to yin, reversing that. Now, this time, move forwards and turn a little bit. Hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. Here's that neutral point that we always pass through. And then let your hands rest. Once again, take a few moments to register your posture, your root, maybe your breathing as well. And then just rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. Up. The other side. Belly. Your legs. Okay, now pushing your knees up and down, pumping the legs a little bit, blood flowing through your muscles again. And then around. Back the other way. Okay. And then standing. As always, use the chair for support, and especially given what I'm talking about, these moments I'm referring to as the punctuation points. Sometimes, you know, it can be a bit difficult, obviously, if you're standing, if you're feeling a bit wobbly or something like that. Just giving yourself that little bit of extra support. Start off with, we'll do that little sequence of rooting down Wild Goose and Parting the Clouds. And I'm trying to find the right position so I don't bump into the chair. So feet hip width apart. Weight a little bit forwards. Hips dropping back. And again, take a moment here to really feel this posture. Sink down just a little bit more, going into that slightly deeper stance. If you can, just rest in here for a moment. Obviously, don't strain in your knees. It's quite strong in your legs. And push back up to that first position. Just be aware of the pull on your hips. It's almost like your hips and pelvis are being pulled down, leaving your shoulders behind for a moment, like there's a spring in between them, and then your shoulders start to follow down. In the bottom position, you feel that push up coming from the legs, and that idea is reversed. It's as though your hips are now being pushed up towards your shoulders, and the spring compressed then just pushes your shoulders up. So those two things that we notice actually are very much corresponding with those punctuation points. You're sinking down, this time bring your hands around, feel that pressure coming up through your hips. When I say pressure, I don't mean something sort of nasty or anything like that. Just a denser feeling, or however you care to think about it. And then Wild Goose. Notice that there's often an urge to sort of rush ahead, to keep moving, to get going, to do the next thing. And that punctuation point just helps to counteract that a little bit. And Parting the Clouds. And then just shake out. Put one foot forwards. Beginning to transfer your weight. And as I said when we were doing, showing this in the chair, those little moments of punctuation are really quite short, but they're easily overlooked. They're easily lost. So in practicing, it can be a good idea to really emphasize them. One way you can do that in this exercise is to not just keep going forwards and backwards, but say you go into your back foot, you rest, And I sometimes use the image of breathing up through my leg and breathing out through my leg. And on the out breath, just looking to sort of settle a little bit more and then moving. And I'm not saying you do that for very long, just do it a few times and then just observe how the length of time shrinks. Because really the key thing at this point, the thing at the heart of what we're looking for is that just that moment of settling. It only takes a split second. Other things can take place there as well, as we know, but without that punctuation, it's not going to happen. And this is working on an assumption that in that transition, in that weight transfer, somehow we've lost touch with that stillness. That may or may not be true for you, but I think it does happen quite often for all of us. And then raising toes and heel in that settling period. And then stepping in. So with experience, you become very familiar with this feeling of central equilibrium, or however you care to label it. On the other side. And effectively what you're doing is you're using your intent in that moment of punctuation to direct the body to go back to that. And it's not a complicated thing. It is difficult, but it's not complicated. So again, if you want to, you can take it for a couple of rounds, just imagining breathing up through your foot, through your leg, and breathing out through it. It might not be that that's a useful image for you, so don't worry if it's not. Obviously, we can't breathe through our leg. Beginning to raise toes and heel. And then stepping in. And make a few steps. So you could easily do the punctuation here as well. Put the foot down slightly, perhaps, to do that. You might even find that you're able to keep the foot. Oops, okay, I didn't do it that time. I was going to say you might even find that you're able to keep the foot up in the air while you do that. I found. And then go in the other direction. one of the things that we developed the habit of, and I noticed myself doing it just then. I wasn't really thinking about doing it, but yeah, if I do take a step, I go to take a step and think, oh, I'm a bit wobbly. Actually, I look for that feeling of dropping. I look for that punctuation point rather than thinking, well, I've got to now somehow correct this. It's like, no, just a second here to drop, and that shows that there's a very kind of practical edge, I think, to this idea. It can sound like quite an abstract idea, but it's one of those things. If we get into the habit of doing this, of seeking the stillness within the movement, it becomes something that we do quite naturally. Now, have your right foot forwards. Start with fisherman castanet. Again, looking for that extension through your arms as you settle in. It may be that will give you a sense for what it really feels like to have the stillness within the movement. In other words, not to be either or. In which case, can you then maintain it in the transfer from one foot to another? And then I'm going to change to push in. Good. And then on the other side. So fisherman castanet. And pushing wave. And then from here, raise the back heel, bring your foot in, bring your hands in and step forwards. So we can look for these punctuation points, this stillness, as a point of change. And it can actually help to make the change smoother. We can do this going backwards as well. And put in. Here it's more like you're just leaving your hands behind. And then shake out. Go back to your chairs. One of the things I realized about this idea a few years ago, it was interesting because it was at the folk festival, and the folk festival sessions that I do there, and just on a whim really, when we got to the end of the session and we were doing Embrace Tiger, Return to Mountain, I just said to people, think about the return and what it means to you, how it feels, or what the image is, or whatever. What's your association with that idea of the return? Because that's the same thing that I've been talking about. It's that punctuation point, and just something that you could keep with you for the rest of the day, sort of thing, to come back to when you felt you needed to. And it was really interesting because the following day, one of the people who's regularly in the session came up to me and he said he'd been coming to the session for several years running, and he said, he hadn't bothered to come up and talk to me before because lots of people, they don't always get a chance, but he actually made a point of it this time because he was saying how useful he found that. He was there with his family, with his kids, and he said, when you're at an event like that and you've got the kids with you, sooner or later there's going to be an argument or a problem or something like that. And he said there was a bit of a incident with the kids. I don't know what it was. He didn't go into detail, but he said he found it really useful to think of whatever it was he thought of. He didn't say what it meant to him, because he said it just calmed him down for a moment, and he felt he was much more able to kind of find a creative way of actually dealing with that situation. It's obvious, really, when you think about it, isn't it? It struck me then that I couldn't work out why I hadn't been saying things like that to people for the last 30 years, but it happens like that sometimes. So we've got this thing of the punctuation, the stillness. Again, it doesn't matter what label you put on it. We find in Embrace Tiger, Return to Mountain, the whole sequence really is aimed at bringing us back to that just for a moment. No suggestion that you're going to stay there the whole time. The tiger is sometimes said to represent our kind of daily lives and just everything that's happening around us. The mountain is the opposite of that. So just with that in mind, how does this exercise work for you? What is it that actually works for you when you do this? What would you want to keep with you as you go through the rest of the day? One more time. And come to rest. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope that's useful. It's a nice little thing to be able to focus on in terms of our practice.